These chilling words came from Assyriologist Samuel Noah Kramer and shook the world of ancient history. What secret about the Sumerians was so shocking that he couldn't share it while he was alive? Were they just the first civilized society, or were they the first to design belief itself, blending writing, rituals, and architecture into a system that shaped how people thought? Drawing from Kramer's unpublished notes, we can uncover the story behind his cryptic confession and the 5 stages of his hidden discovery. Kramer spent decades reading thousands of Sumerian tablets, grain delivery lists, temple hymns, royal decrees, and creation myths. Most of the time, everything made sense, but then he noticed something strange. Certain phrases kept showing up in places they didn't belong. A line from a temple hymn might appear in a warehouse record. A phrase meant for a god would show up in a worker's ration list. These weren't random mistakes. They were echoes that followed him across dozens of texts. At first, he thought it was coincidence, but soon the repetition became impossible to ignore. Numbers, symbols, and formulaic sentences appeared across completely different types of writing. Kramer called them the sentences that wouldn't let go. They blurred the lines between sacred and practical writing, between myths and math, while most scholars ignored it as shared vocabulary. Kramer sensed something deeper, an intentional design hidden in the world's first writing system. One phrase haunted him above all: to raise the pure mountain and bind heaven and earth. It showed up in temple hymns and, surprisingly, in construction logs for the ziggurat at Ur. Why would building records use the language of sacred chants? The answer, Kramer realized, was that the Sumerians were connecting the divine and the everyday in every detail. When Kramer studied the ziggurat at Ur, he saw that the Sumerians hadn't just written their worldview, they had built it. Rising like a man-made mountain, the ziggurat's massive terraces climbed toward the heavens, ending in a shrine for the moon, god Nana. Every brick, step, and alignment with the stars reflected the same messages he found in the tablets. Heaven, earth, and authority were all connected. The written words and the architecture mirrored each other. Construction logs used the same words as religious rituals. Verbs like to purify, to ascend, and to bind heaven appeared whether priests were performing ceremonies or workers were hauling bricks. Every act of building was sacred, a continuation of creation itself. Kramer described the ziggurat as a 3-dimensional text, a monument you could read as you climbed it. Each terrace represented a layer of the cosmos: the lowest, the earthly plane; the middle, the stars; the highest, the divine realm. Walking up the steps wasn't just exercise, it was a journey through Sumerian theology. The ziggurat and the tablets worked together. One made belief visible, the other made it repeatable. Together, they created a system where every festival, offering, and law reinforced cosmic order. The Sumerian ziggurat at Ur wasn't just a building, it was a story you could walk through. Each terrace represented a layer of the universe: the lowest, the earthly world; the middle, the stars and sky; and the highest, the realm of the gods. Worshippers climbing the stairways weren't just walking upward, they were moving through the very ideas and beliefs of their civilization. Samuel Noah Kramer realized something extraordinary. The ziggurat physically expressed the same patterns he had found hidden in Sumerian tablets. The priests, scribes, and workers who built it were, knowingly or not, bringing the words of the gods to life. Offerings recorded in rhythmic, formulaic lines mirrored the terrace's structure. One tablet even described the king as the stair between gods and men, literally making him a living embodiment of the ziggurat itself. These weren't just pretty words or poetic flourishes, They were blueprints. The ziggurat and the tablets didn't just coexist, they completed each other. One made belief visible, the other made it repeatable. Every festival, offering, and law reinforced the cosmic order written into both clay and stone. For Kramer, this changed everything about how we understand Sumerian civilization. The ziggurat wasn't just a temple, it was religion made tangible. Its geometry, its records, and its construction all sent the same message. The world was layered, ordered, and divine. And every ascent reminded citizens not just of the heavens, but of their place within that order. But the real power wasn't in kings or temples, it was in the scribes. Kramer followed the trail of repeating phrases from tablets to terraces and realized that behind every hymn, decree, and ledger stood these quiet architects of history. They were the ones who transformed thought into record and record into law. Without scribes, there would have been no civilization. In tablet houses across cities like Ur and Nippur, young scribes trained for years under strict supervision. They copied lists, hymns, contracts, and myths until the signs were memorized. Sacred and administrative work were taught side by side. 1 hour a student might measure bricks, the next recite a hymn to Inanna. Over time, the lines blurred. Writing became both ritual and record. Cuneiform was no easy script. Many signs carried multiple meanings. A star could also mean God, and life could double as a count. This gave scribes incredible power. They could embed theology into trade, lace divine order into administration, and control how history was remembered. In other words, they didn't just record power, they created it. Even when kings fell and cities burned, the same phrases, numbers, and ritual formulas endured. It wasn't the rulers shaping history. It was the scribes maintaining it. They were the custodians of cosmic order, keeping civilization running not with armies, but with words impressed into clay. This realization reframed Kramer's understanding of the Sumerians completely. The ziggurat may have shown their theology, but the scribes were its interpreters, translating between gods and humans, myth and math. Every tablet, from creation myths to ration lists, bore their fingerprints. They decided which ideas survived, which phrases were repeated, and which truths became canon. To Kramer, these scribes were history's first true authors of ideology. And yet, one mystery remained. Why did the same numbers, symbols, and phrases keep repeating across myths and ledgers century after century? By the final decade of his life, Samuel Noah Kramer had read more Sumerian tablets than anyone else in the world. Yet instead of feeling satisfied, he felt there was something missing, an intuition that the real message was still hidden beneath the surface. The words were clear, the grammar consistent, but the repetition of forms, numbers, and phrases seemed too deliberate to be random. There was a pattern in the clay, a system that stretched across centuries, cities, and kings. It connected myths to tax records, prayers to labor lists, and cosmic hierarchies to human rules. Kramer began charting these recurring sequences like a mathematician mapping the stars. Certain words appeared together in predictable cycles: pure, measure, binding, ascending. These combinations showed up in temple hymns, festival decrees, and even scribal exercises. At first, it looked like ordinary ritual language, formulaic, symbolic, maybe even poetic. But the more Kramer studied it, the more he realized this was a structural rhythm, a template that shaped not just language, but the Sumerians' whole way of seeing the world. The numbers were even more revealing. Across hundreds of tablets, sacred counts, 3, 7, 12, 60, anchored everything, from mythic genealogies to labor records. To Kramer, these numbers weren't random. They were rules of harmony, designed to align daily life with cosmic order. When a priest offered 7 sheep or a builder recorded 60 bricks, it wasn't just bookkeeping, it was ritual math, a way of syncing the city with the universe. What amazed Kramer most was that this pattern persisted through time and geography. Whether the king was Ur-Nammu or Shulgi, whether the city was Uruk or Lagash, the phrasing stayed consistent. It was as if every scribe, knowingly or not, was following the same invisible template. Bureaucracy, religion, and mythology all followed the same textual DNA. This led Kramer to a bold conclusion. The Sumerians weren't just recording their world, they were sustaining it. Writing itself created reality. He called it the Sumerian Code, not a puzzle to solve, but a cultural system that repeated itself across society. The ziggurat was the monument, the tablet was the tool, and the scribe was the operator. Reading or reciting a text maintained the system. Writing one renewed it. These tablets weren't just archives, they were engines of continuity. Kramer even told a colleague that this insight disturbed him more than any myth or artifact he had studied. Civilization's first writing system, he realized, might also have been its first programming language, a way to encode hierarchy, belief, and obedience into everyday life. The clay wasn't just telling stories about gods, it was about control. As Kramer's health declined, he started speaking less in lectures and more in fragments, half-thoughts that hovered between revelation and warning. His students remembered him as methodical and modest, not prone to drama. So when he ended letters and interviews with the phrase, "Before I die, please listen," it stood out. It wasn't a cry for fame. It was the burden of something unsaid. After decades of decoding Sumerian words, Kramer believed he had discovered their ultimate secret. Language itself could shape the human mind. His discovery wasn't a single tablet or translation, it grew slowly all. When a scribe wrote that a king was chosen by the gods, that act of writing made it true in the Sumerian worldview. Writing was creation, and those who controlled it shaped reality itself. In his later notebooks, Kramer explained that every civilization has 2 kinds of power: the visible, bricks, armies, temples, and the invisible, stories, laws, myths. The Sumerians had found a way to fuse these powers through writing, making belief, order, and authority inseparable. The Sumerians didn't just write, they built a system. The ziggurat showed divine hierarchy in stone, while Cuneiform preserved it in text. Together, they formed a feedback loop. The priest read the tablet, the worker hauled the brick, and both believed they were fulfilling the will of the gods. In reality, they were following a logic carefully encoded by scribes centuries earlier. Kramer worried that people might misunderstand this as mystical or conspiratorial, so he rarely spoke about it directly. But in one letter to a colleague, he wrote, "The Sumerians discovered that to rule the mind, one needs only rule the symbols." He even underlined it twice. To him, this was their most important invention, the understanding that control over language could replace control over force. This invisible power became the quiet foundation for all organized societies that came after. The tragedy, Kramer believed, was how invisible it was. Once writing became part of ritual and governance, no one questioned it. The words of the gods became the grammar of the state. The Sumerians hadn't just created a script, they had created a system of thought, a way of seeing the world that shaped laws, religion, and bureaucracy for millennia. When we look at these tablets today, we see ancient texts. Kramer saw something bigger, the blueprint of civilization itself. His final writings, found among unpublished papers, read more like reflections than scholarly work. He pointed out that the separation between sacred and secular, myth and record, was an illusion, one that didn't exist in Sumer. He wrote, "The first writers did not record truth, they manufactured it." This wasn't a criticism, it was recognition. Humanity's first great technology was belief, made durable through words. Stories weren't mistakes, they were tools that shaped reality, guiding societies as effectively as laws or armies. Every tablet, scroll, or inscription became less a record of what happened and more a blueprint for what could happen. Kramer's warning still resonates. The Sumerians taught humanity that whoever writes history also defines truth. Their clay tablets didn't just document civilization, they created it. Through writing, they built the first system where words shaped faith, power, and order. So think about it. Do our institutions still use words the same way today? If this story opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next deep dive into the ancient secrets that continue to shape the modern world.